Hi, everyone. Welcome to All About the Joy. I'm Carmen Lisa, your host, and this is the Private Lounge.
When you're in an art museum and you think like, I don't like this. I don't like it at all. It's nothing. That's where you have to pay attention. That's where you have to actually force yourself to think clearly. That's the place where you're really learning something.
So I just want to say first, welcome to All About the Joy. I'm so glad you're here, Steven.
Thank you.
It's an honor.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I know you've been doing a lot of podcasts because I've been listening to a lot of them.
Okay.
And I'm just going to be straight up honest with you. A lot of people ask to be on our little tiny podcast show. And I usually say no because I can't connect them to us and what we do. And so I love that your people reached out to me because I feel like you remind me of when I was growing up in Boston and I was forced to go to the Boston Fine Arts Museum, right? I grew up poor, blue collar, the story. And I remember being in front of what was called high art.
Mm-hmm.
Canvas, a white canvas with like a blue line going through it.
Okay.
And I think I was like 6 or 7 years old and I was so confused and I hated every moment of it. But what it did was it opened up my brain to the idea of art.
Mm-hmm.
And I am saying this for also our audience, but for me as well. I think what I love about learning about you and about what you do, you are a writer, you're a poet, you're a philosopher. Tell me if I'm wrong, but and
a photographer, and a
photographer. I'm so sorry. I knew I was missing. And that's that's an important
the art part that you're discussing, that you're mentioning. Yeah. So.
Yeah, but you're a true artist, and I love when I have to elevate my thinking, my feeling to understand things. And it's not to make people afraid of your work. It's to welcome them into it. So I hope you take that as a compliment, me calling it high art.
Sure. I'm happy if anybody calls it anything. I don't care really. They could mean it as an insult, and I would, whatever they say, and I would take it as a compliment if they're talking about it.
Yeah. Well, can we talk about why you can, this is about you, but it's going to be about me. You can already tell.
Yeah.
No. But I want to look at our show is mostly about a conversation. So, but why do you look at abandoned and decaying areas and make a decision to either photograph it or write about it? But what is it that you see in these? I don't even know what to call them because sometimes it's photography, but you also write about it. So what is it that you see that I don't see, and how do you make it a story about human beings?
Well, in fact, like abandonment there are different ways in which you might say that I approach this kind of work in writing and in photography and other art practice, visual art practice. There is a fetishization of the ruin or of a certain type of decay in some photography and in some popular culture. And it's important for me to try to make a distinction between what I'm doing and what happens in these images that seem solely to romanticize decay. So for me, the way to do that is in part by making sure, so my photographic practice happens in series, it happens within the confines and the context of a conceptual structure. Always. So,
right. You know what? You're already talking way above my.
Oh, no problem.
No. So I just want to interpret it in the way that I understand it.
Sure.
So you so you'll see an abandoned wall or pipes or something, and you take not just one photograph, you take a series of them. Is that correct?
Well, I will only. So, for instance, I have a project, and I'll give you some examples from a couple of books of photographs of mine. Right. So one is of a cast iron pipe structure in Berlin that is disused, a drainage pipe structure, clean out valve for drainage pipes it's a strange looking structure. It has almost a kind of an animal look to it, a totemic look in some ways. And they are in use, but decaying and being replaced because they're cast iron. It's from the GDR, the East Germany, and it's a kind of production that was possible in East Germany where they're cast for each particular building, even though they're within this kind of form. And so for me, I don't just see a pipe and say, oh, I'll photograph that pipe. I would only do this if there's a repetition of that structure. So I see that, and I think that's an interesting valve on this pipe. And a similar structure, though, for instance, that is not decaying, that I photographed is in Venice. They have a very particular and what seemed to me compelling gas valve structure that is on many of the buildings. In Rome, there's a structure that is a little door in the sides of buildings that house through which you can access plumbing and electrical conduits from the outside of the building. In London, there's a little plastic thing that used to be a part of the pavement to indicate where gas pipes were. No longer does that, but it's stuck in the pavement, and it's a kind of grid, and the grid gets filled in with different kinds of flora and fauna. So in each of these cases, a single instance of any of these things is, I might like to look at it, but I'm not going to photograph it. I need to find a repetition, and a repetition that is voluminous enough to, in a manner of speaking, push this kind of echo through a series so that anyone who's looking at that series is forced to think through the structure of the, say, industrial appliance in this case that I'm imaging, which changes how they're looking at the piece, right? It's not that people can't look at an individual piece, but the conceptual structure allows it to have a different kind of compositional meaning. It is
so could it be rhythmic?
Yeah.
Is it?
It's kind of rhythmic. It's a kind of.
I feel like there's you know what? There's and again, I apologize, but we're going to go through all of these handwritten notes.
Well, I'll finish with one last example. So another project of mine, which is maybe more clearly focused on what would be seen as the ruin, is this. It's a series of mine called The Architecture of Silence. Which,
no, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah,
I have it right here.
There you go.
Right. Why do you see beauty in what others would think is ugly, like a crumbling wall, abandoned architecture? Right. It's like a visual song, right? Yes,
it is like that. But in that series, although there are structural relationships, structural rhythms, there's also a big, broad conceptual rhythm because it is within a particular region, and it is all of this abandonment that's associated with a particular land reform movement that has a strange and I think important history in Italy, but in the world, a history of American imperialism, where and this is in Italy. So you see that in post-war Italy, the newly formed Italian Republic, the conservatives are trying to, or the American liberals are, as it were, trying to appropriate the ideologies of the communists, who are gaining political ground because of the gross wealth inequalities in post-war Italy, just as in pre-war Italy and in fascist Italy.
But I want to make a little note here for my audience.
Yeah.
That's what your art is doing. So we may see the piece that you've photographed and see the series, but it's telling a human story.
Yes. Yes, and often with I work with a collaborator. So in fact, my writing is always separate from my photography. And the narrative aspects that accompany my photography are always, they can be written by a number of different people, but are primarily in relationship to my collaborator and my life partner, Carolyn White, who is an anthropologist and an archaeologist.
Oh, wow. Okay, I missed that.
Yeah, no, well,
That makes total sense,
yeah,
though. Like,
yeah.
okay, that is awesome.
Right. So we work together in these places, and we do these
Right.
projects together, and we each have our roles. They're separate roles.
Right.
They're separate activities. They also come together in these interesting ways, I think. So I think that with respect to these series, they can be read as visual work and the visual work has a rhythmic character that maybe is more like poetry. So it doesn't. So in that sense, poetry doesn't have a narrative structure like prose does. It's a different. It can move away from narrative. It can move around.
Yes.
It's not necessarily telling a story, so to speak. It may be evoking a set of ideas or an emotional response, an emotive response.
Well, I'm gonna disagree with you, which is kind of hard for me to do because I have such respect and esteem for you. Well, no, I've just learned so much about you, and I do get a little giddy when I learn from people, and I say that not to be snooty, but you surround yourself with people who are better than you, so you become a better person, and you are offering something I don't have. And so that's why I'm a little giddy about it. But I love Maya Angelou. There are certain poets that I love that are very narrative. And I think I'll say this for myself, but it was hard for me to read Coda. I'm just going to be honest.
Sure.
Much easier for me to listen to you because I saw a couple of your YouTube, and also it's on Spotify. It's on podcast. You actually read it, and it's not a narrative, but it's a feeling. It's an isness. Like, that's probably not great, but it's an isness listening to what you've written. And if you just let yourself go with it, it makes so much more enjoyable the experience.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and actually, I love that neologism, isness. I think isness is a fantastic way of thinking about it. A very entirely Heideggerian of you. So
I don't know what that means.
I know. I figured that you're not familiar with that work, but it would be, you would find it interesting and also it's confusing work anyway to anyone. I want to just go back one moment and say that I happen to have access to in relationship to ways of being and doing that you might find compelling and compelling to engage with. Does you use the word better, and I'm going to cringe at that. At a hierarchy. I'm not going to allow a hierarchy to enter that. I'm not. There's no better and worse. That's not a relation. That's not the kind of relationship we're setting up, or that anybody should be setting up with respect to this kind of thinking. And so I would say to speak to Maya Angelou, for instance, very much a narrative poet whose work does, but not in the way that someone telling that story as prose would tell it. It's a different way of evoking, and that's what makes it. That's what makes her a great poet. She's not a great story writer. She's a great poet, and because poetry can do something that stories can't do. They can mean in multiple ways. They can leave gaps where often they don't need plot and character. They don't need any of the narrative contrivances of contemporary prose, which I mean haven't always been what prose is, and maybe at a different time where there is more openness about what prose can be. My work would be seen as prose, not as poetry, for instance. And Maya Angelou might be writing more in a context like that. Maybe Maya Angelou would find, and not that there are not great prose writers, there are, of course, who tell stories. But I happen to find really important the ways that narrative poets manage to tell stories that are in very different ways from the way that storytellers do. And of course, then there's a lot of poets who aren't narrative poets too, or who go in and out of narrativity. So if we think of, there are so many examples of this, of great poets in every language, some of whom are really rather far from any narrativity, and some of whom go in and out of a relationship to narrativity.
Would you consider someone like Khalil Gibran, like the prophet? Would you consider him a poet?
I think he writes in a poetic style. I think there are different ways in which, I'm not that familiar with that work. I'm a little bit familiar with it but it's been many, many years.
Yeah, I mean, the prophet's been around forever, but yeah.
Right. And it was, it's been very many decades since I've looked at it. But I would say that it's a kind of, in a manner of speaking, a kind of wisdom literature or wisdom poetry. And it's not quite, it's not philosophical. I mean, it's philosophical, but it's not philosophy. And it is, and it has a relationship.
Wait, can you explain? Can you, I need this for me. Can you explain it's philosophical, but it's not philosophy?
Well, I mean, it doesn't really appropriate it really is, I think, and even in its title, calling it the prophet, it is appropriating and thinking through the tropes of prophetic literature and revelatory or religious literature, right?
Okay, fair.
I think he thinks of it. I mean, that's neither a praise or criticism; it's just descriptive,
right?
And I think then, as opposed to when I say it's not philosophy, I mean it doesn't engage with the kinds of questions that are engendered in the philosophical traditions, in various philosophical traditions. In the tradition in the West, that starts with, in many respects, in terms of our literary knowledge, it starts with Plato. But in China, Japan, India, Africa, many places, there are similar traditions that develop in similar ways, though with their own distinct resonances that are not interacting with the Western tradition. The Western tradition, obviously, is because we are so inundated with those sources and our view of so many other sources, at least in the European West, is so obstructed or even occluded by colonialism. But
okay, I want to hear more about how you became who you are today in this field. But before we do that, I'm going to go back because you just slapped me in my own podcast about better. No, it was good. It was good. You're honest. What would be the right way to say what I was trying to say then? Because I think you're on point, right? I just want to learn something different.
Yeah.
There is no doubt there is something you're giving me that I didn't know before. And what I'm trying to share with my audience is that feeling of when you're a kid. Look, one of the best things that happened to me when I was a kid was I was forced to see, and I say forced, to see the opera Carmen. Okay. And my name is Carmen, for those who are confused. But also, as a young kid, I was really into dance and I loved it. So I had to go see Mikhail Baryshnikov and I saw Rudolf Nureyev. These are things that people in my neighborhood would have never had the opportunity to see. But it changes who you are because you learn something you didn't know before. So what would be a better way for me to have said what I said, that you were better than me or something? What would have been a better way to share what I was trying to say?
Well, I just, the reason why I don't want people to say that someone is better than someone else because of, say, for instance, access, the fact that I have this kind of the sorts of knowledge base that I have and the sorts of references that I have. Yeah, a lot of that has to do with my motivation and what I'm drawn to. But I would say more of it has to do with opportunities I've been given that other people haven't been given. It's chance. Our lives are structured around fortune, right? And we have material advantage or not, and if we don't, an opportunity, a sliver of opportunity opens up for us somewhere along the way, and sometimes, and we accidentally step into it. Or we seize the opportunity and we like to give ourselves credit for it, but it's absurd. We can't give ourselves credit for it. We don't all have we have because we're not all ready at the same. We're not all prepared or we haven't all been prepared to take those opportunities when they present themselves. So it's not just, it's also that, we're here to talk about my work. So of course we're talking about my work, and
Right.
but there's another context where you're talking about your life experience, your life as a podcaster, your life in 100 ways that I have no knowledge of, and where I'm learning from you. And that is, it's reasonable to assume that those relationships happen in every relationship. There's always, and it happens to be the case that right now you see me, it's the structure of your podcast.
I think you're very kind and humble and gracious. I think that's awesome. How did you find yourself becoming the photographer, the writer, the philosopher, the poet?
Well, I for me, I would say, in many ways, just as an example of this, my intellectual and creative path began with a kind of what was and would definitively be seen as mental illness, as a neurosis, as debilitating obsessive compulsive disorder when I was a kid.
Really?
Yeah.
This is so fascinating. Okay.
Yeah. And then that, I was in a circumstance where my parent, though I was floundering quite terribly and was failing out of high school, but my parents could say, look, you could do some, I mean, it wasn't easy for them. They felt like it was at that time that it would be a stigma for me to go into therapy, to talk to someone, right, and a stigma on them, as they didn't grow up with anything that might see that they were not people who went to college, or my father didn't graduate from high school. It was they came out of a background that and I, in my compulsive life, I happened to find, for whatever reason, certain types of literary engagement as the only place of some relief, I suppose.
Wow.
So it was reading those materials. I don't know why that is. They weren't presented to me in that way, but somehow that it occurred to. I found that work, and it freed me in some way, thinking in these ways. So, and then through that I was able to, through seeing this psychiatrist, and then through an intervention that allowed me to, again, by virtue of where I was and who my parents were in that context, and the social world that I grew up in, and which a solidly middle class place, I was able to be seen in the suburbs of the Philadelphia suburbs. I was able to be
from
seen.
Philadelphia. Okay.
Yeah, from South Jersey, from New Jersey, the New Jersey suburbs of Philadelphia. So I'm not Philadelphia itself. And I could be seen by, and ultimately, the things I was doing could be seen as valuable, even though they were taking me away from school. But and this is just to say, other people in other circumstances, it wouldn't be seen as valuable, and they wouldn't find a pathway out. So I found, for me, it was seen as valuable, and then and I was able to go to college before, without finishing high school. So I could leave high school and go to college, but again, it's luck. It's luck that happened.
I think,
but it's luck.
Well, okay, so you and I will disagree on that, and we'll fight about that some other time. I don't know if it's. I don't want to believe in luck. I think it's hard for me to believe in luck, because I feel like every day I fight for what I learn and what I am, and you know what I mean? And I think that's part of how I just grew up. And so to throw it all to luck feels not okay for me. I don't know how to explain it.
Okay, maybe luck is not the exactly right word, but it is. We are we it's not luck as in fate. I don't mean it
Okay.
that way. I mean luck as in we live in a society and a culture which is so profoundly inflected by inequity, right?
That is absolutely true. Yes.
By class inequity, by prejudice in various forms, by racism, by by xenophobia,
All of it.
all of the things, and sexism and homophobia and transphobia and everything else that we are experiencing so radically now. And so people who are are so when I say luck, I mean I'm happy to say that I think that when I was growing up in where I grew up, even a fairly progressive place, and I went to a really progressive college, and people could be out, but it wasn't without stigma, right?
Yeah.
And I had as an example, a very close friend who was trans. We would call it now, but then we didn't. That wasn't
right. We didn't have those words, right? People don't realize that. Yeah.
And he couldn't find a path to express that. And I mean, I report this with still enormous sadness that he took his own life. He was a victim of suicide, ultimately, because he was so oppressed by this cultural milieu that we were in at that time. That wouldn't happen now. So in a sense, he had the bad luck of being, if he were born now, that would have been better luck than so that's the kind of luck I'm talking about. It's not really the luck.
It sounds more like, so I think we're kind of on the same page. I believe in chaos theory, right? So I love the idea that we don't understand what we think is chaos, but if you look at it closely, there are patterns, and those patterns have consequences to them, right? So it's kind of what you're saying in a roundabout way, I think, that it's societal, and we don't all have the same possibilities.
It's designed that way. I mean,
it's designed though. Oh, that's great.
It's supposed, that's what they want. This is what it's what we insofar as one of the interesting things about how capitalism develops is that it seems to have an agency of its own. Of course, it doesn't, but so it has in the way in which it requires and asks of us to accept that the greatest possible equity in the society is through these monstrous mechanisms of inequity. And because it assumes that any attempt to, I mean, this is what a conservative would tell you, that any attempt to change that inequity would be filled with so much corruption and malfeasance that it would create other forms of inequity. Of course, most of those people are not have not been on the side of those inequities. So
to know any better, and we can see that the evidence with what's happening in New York with Mayor Mamdani.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so weird. Okay, this is not how I thought this interview was going to go. Thank you so much for indulging me. This is so much fun for me. I hope it's working for you too.
Sure.
I have kind of maybe an odd question, but I'm going to ask it. You travel around the world. You've been to Japan, Italy. You've done all this work, all this art. Is the decay and the abandonment and kind of the ugliness different in different places, or is there something that's fundamentally the same about them?
Both, I would say, and I would not say ugliness in any of these cases. Interesting. It's a discomfort. So, for instance, in the case of the work in Basilicata and Puglia in Italy, in southern Italy, this work in these abandoned houses of this post-war land reform movement. So, part of the reason people are drawn to imaging abandonment is that there is a way in which, I mean, obviously there is a kind of popular term that references how in Japanese art, there's a value to natural decay, and the people say wabi sabi, which is kind of a silly thing, but it essentially means what people are trying to suggest, and what is true about a certain tradition within Japanese aesthetics, which we see they've just vocalized it as opposed to.
So this is natural decay.
Yeah, so
what the word means. Okay,
it does. So you might see Japanese ceramics might often, like some of the most interesting and greatest potters in the Japanese ceramics tradition are will in a manner of speaking use glazes and other things, and even manipulations of the form of the vessel that they're making to approximate a kind of decaying matter in a natural setting. And and it's seen as and part of that, and in Eastern traditions in general, there's a much more profound appreciation, or earlier appreciation of art that refuses symmetry. So early and so symmetry is, of course, a very basic mode of composition, and one which we all
everything being equal,
and in very particular ways, and so not really finding negative space in that sort of way, and even in the ways in which those arts traditionally do not attempt to reproduce spatial relations or relationships within what they're representing accurately. So they are abstract from the beginning, and they remain abstract. And we see that. So there's a way in which people want to think that the Renaissance, for instance, is this great leap forward. It's a leap forward in Western art, and is it a leap forward? Is when we look back at medieval art, for instance, and its flatness, characterized by this flatness, that is a kind. Of course, it's a kind of abstraction from, and as an abstraction, it's not something that is in inability. It's a different mode, a different expressive mode. And in Japanese arts, in Chinese arts, and Indian arts, that flatness was sought. It wasn't that it was. So when the Jesuits, for instance, first showed up in Japan and proposed the recently discovered ways of drawing perspective and representing perspective, the Japanese said, why would we want to do that? We're making art. We're not making. I'm not just trying to. This is. I don't need it to be accurate. I need it to be expressive.
Okay.
And so, and of course, obviously in Western art, we have moved past representational and figurative art, as we have in many other arts have and did at the beginning. Of course, many of the early people working in abstraction in the West took great influence from and appropriated a lot of the tropes of art practices and art traditions that were not Western, of African traditions, of Asian traditions, and the ways in which those abstractions were already a well-established part of those traditions. That's, of course, in fact, it's always framed as Picasso loved primitive. It's not always framed. It used to be always framed as Picasso liking. I mean, and they're all horribly colonialist and racist.
Right.
But happily, art historians are not so now, I think, to a large extent. Or I hope that's true. I hope
it's true too, but
yeah, anyways. There are many who are. But this is all to say that in my work representing those abandoned spaces, right? Those abandoned spaces represent. They're difficult for people to look at. People, I hope, often, I think an interesting thing is to take something that people find perhaps on some level ugly in the way that you're saying and make it beautiful and find it so that the image is beautiful, although the thing was seen as ugly. And it's often seen as ugly because of the ways in which the history that it evokes. So it's an interesting, one of the interesting relationships with people in the communities where these houses in that series reside, or are they're basically in the fields. The people sort of who directly remember living in those homes, or their parents or grandparents living in those homes, the ones who experience those places and experience them as sites of tragedy.
Beautiful.
They don't want to see those photos. They don't want to see them.
They don't want to see them at all.
No, they don't. Why are you doing this? Why? This is an ugly thing and an ugly period, and this is painful.
Oh, and I thought it was the opposite. Okay.
Yeah, and it's the younger generation and part of that is that, and this is often the case, is that people who, it's easy for people who are victimized by policy, by whatever, to understand it and to even frame it as a personal failing. And it's not. They'll say, "Well, I'm ashamed of this having happened here," as though it had something to do with them, and it has nothing to do. It was in this case, it was a program that was designed to fail, that it couldn't have succeeded. And
but I think just to give it a different framing. Wow, that just totally threw my whole idea, because like when I think back on where I grew up and I remember my home where my mom was or whatever, and there's a lot of tragedy that happened and a lot of stuff. So you would think I'd be like those people, right? Like I'd be like, but actually the opposite happens, where I'm like, I remember the good parts. I don't have to remember. But what you're saying is, well, what you're alluding to is that a lot of the people that grew up there, that these homes were theirs, they see the ugliness, they don't see the good parts, and they almost, I don't want to say blame themselves, but you must feel something of some sort of responsibility, right? To evoke that feeling.
I think that they do blame themselves, and it's that they weren't able to succeed, that the program didn't succeed for them. So this was a program that was supposed to lead them to have their own land, there to farm and so on, but it was structured so that they really couldn't. The best they could do was subsistence.
And the philosophy part of this that you kind of hang on to is that it wasn't their. This is the luck thing you're talking about.
It was definitively not their fault. They couldn't have succeeded. Right. And so they end up often only in those houses, unlike perhaps the house you grew up in. They're only in those houses for a couple of years before they have to move on. And so they've lost their old lives. The communities they came from are gone because they've all been moved to these houses all over the place. So the next thing they can do, they abandon those houses, and then they're, and those houses and the land associated with them revert back to government ownership and then get sold to large agribusiness in the post-war era. So it's this conversion of kind of feudal agriculture, small or large estate with essentially tenant farmers into corporate agriculture in a generation. And those people they look for work elsewhere. They go to the northern Italy factories that are developing post-war. They go to Germany. They come to the United States. They end up having, but with this sense like, oh, there was this program. It was for me, and I couldn't make it work.
And I failed, or I whatever, and
people think that, or that's what people say,
people believe that, or whatever, and that's what your art evokes. That's the story behind everything that you kind of do. And that's kind of what I want to share with people, is kind of how I started with that story, going to the art museum as a kid, just feeling first overwhelmed because it was new to me, and then being able to take it in, and wow, that was just so fascinating. What do you want people who may have never read your books or have never seen any of your art, what would you like people to take from this conversation?
I don't know that I ever go into a conversation with some notion, but it's a conversation. So I'm learning about you and about your life experience, and I think this childhood experience that you're describing of going to the art museum, of going to the MFA, and the ways in which, and this is something I tell people all the time who, friends or family or what have you, who are not perhaps particularly interested in art and who haven't had that much experience or haven't had spend time thinking about it or learning about it, and crawling into it, as it were. And is when you see a piece, when you're in an art museum and you think like, I don't like this, I don't like it at all, it's nothing. That's where you have to pay attention. That's where you have to actually force yourself to think clearly. That's the place where you're really learning something, is when you're thinking, well, there's some kind of discursive context. It's not to say you're going to come away with a different feeling. Maybe you still hate the piece, right? Mm-hmm. But you hate it for a different reason. You ask yourself, okay, let's say, I don't know what's going on here. Why, I hate this, but obviously somebody doesn't. Somebody thinks somebody's willing to, devote a huge amount of resources to not just to making it, but obviously to purchasing it, to hanging it, to having it in a museum, the space in the museum, which is different, there's a lot of art competing to be in that space, right? Yep. So somebody is thinking, okay, so you ask yourself, what are they thinking, and how do I figure out what they were thinking, right? Yeah. And that in itself is a journey, because the journey through the discursive practices of art and the way that art relates to other art, and the way in which it's talking to other art. And the same thing is true with literature. When you find work that troubles you, that bothers you, and that where you think, I don't understand this. Yeah. You don't have to ultimately understand it. You don't have to ultimately like it. But I guarantee you, a lot of the things that you think you hate and don't understand are things that you will most love when you get to the bottom of it.
I love that. That is exactly true. I think you said something is really important. I lean in when I don't know. And I wish more people would lean in. So if something scares you or something you don't understand it, why don't you, like, instead of pushing it away, why don't you embrace it? And it's because I to this day, it is a white canvas with a blue line through it. I'll never forget it. I don't know who the artist is. I don't want to know because I don't want to mess up the memory. But here's the thing. I felt stupid. I felt dumb. Mm-hmm. I felt poor. I felt blacker and more Latina, like, because that, it had its own ideas to it, right? Because I wasn't smart enough. And that's what that was about.
Right. Right. And, that can often be the case that people, when they feel, I guarantee you that the painter making that painting didn't think, I really hope people see this and feel dumb.
No, of course not. Of course not.
And I understand why but that's because you were not there. It's wonderful that you were put in front of it. You don't have to, but when you're put in front of work that you're not prepared to see, that can be a revelation for exactly the reason you say, I feel dumb, but you think, well, what, I just don't understand this. That doesn't mean I'm dumb. It means a lot of people will respond to that with anger. And if they don't understand something, they think it means that it's not meaningful, that it doesn't have meaning if they can't find the meaning initially.
Because they make it about the other person and not themselves. They make it about the artist instead of themselves.
That's right. And, again, they could come to the bottom. There's plenty of art that I think, I really don't like that piece. I don't like that work. I don't like that direction. I don't like the way that person writes. I don't like what they're writing. I don't like their style. I don't like this. I don't like this practice of painters, but of a particular painter or what have you. And then it happens all the time. Yeah. As you know more about what people are doing, of course, you don't have fewer opinions, but I'll tell you, I don't hate it because I don't feel repulsed. I don't feel there. You see this often that people who are looking, whose idea of art is essentially a kind of painted photograph. They want representation. They just want accurate representation on a certain way, and they don't know. They're not even distinguishing between those forms of representation. Those ways of that representation can be are expressive.
They're expressed, right.
And so and that's, they haven't thought about it that much. They haven't been exposed to it that much. They haven't had the opportunity to think about it and to be exposed to it. And so for them, abstraction in particular ends up seeming like a form of repulsive nonsense.
Right.
And what I think is so compelling, and I'll say this about my own work, I have people who will say, I don't understand why you photograph that. I just don't understand. It's a pipe. I don't get that. Right. And I'd be like, well, okay, that's fine. I don't need you to get it. I don't care. Or with my writing, it's difficult. I know it's difficult work. And people will say, I don't understand. And say, okay. That's okay, Yeah.
I know, but I actually want people to. I did not understand your people sent me the PDF.
Yeah.
And I started reading it, and I was like, and I knew 4 pages in, I'm like, I'm not feeling it. I'm not feeling it. But then I was like, well, let me go to his website, which is Steven Seidenberg. Am I saying it right? Your name?
You are.
Seidenberg.com. You can find all of his work there. It's also on Amazon, but go to his website first and find the links there. I went and then I saw Spotify, and I saw that you had the links to the audio, and I saw that you had done some readings, just a few chapters at different bookstores or whatever. And so I watched those to get a vibe of who you are, which really helped for me. And then, and I don't know if aphantasia works in my favor, but I think it does in this sense. You know what aphantasia is, right?
No, I don't know what it is.
Oh, for people who don't know what aphantasia is, so aphantasia is the inability to form images. I don't have photographs that come in my head, right? So most people, a lot of people don't know this, but most people, when they think of things, they think, oh, let me think of Steven. They see a picture of Steven in his head. I don't. I would remember the feeling I have of you. And so sometimes I think it works in my favor. And in this case, the audio version and then reading along with it, because it's not a linear story. And for me, it was really about feeling. And that's where it clicked for me, and I stopped trying to. I'm like, who is telling this story? It's not a known narrator. Right. So I think, and I haven't finished it, but I am going to, because I'm excited by it, So I hope that's what people get from this episode. I'm so glad you're here and that you chose to come on here. I know you're doing the gamut of it, but I just feel really honored, and I don't care how you feel about that.
No, I feel good about that. I feel honored too to talk to you. So I can say it can be in both directions. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, just apropos of what you were just saying, that one of the understanding is overrated. Being in a place of misunderstanding or of confusion is extraordinarily valuable. And allowing yourself to just be confused and see what happens. What's the problem? And for with respect to say Coda or other literary work of mine, as you say, so I'll say also to plug that the last 3 books of mine are available as audiobooks for free. You can download them and find them on all the Spotify and Audible and all those places, or on my website. You can find links to all of that, and you can read along, or you can just listen to the complete works of those last 3 books of mine, and there you can allow yourself to not understand, but to hear the work, to hear the musicality of the work, to appreciate and to allow yourself to be transported by the rhythm of the work and the way in which it moves in that respect. And you understand a bit here, and then you don't, and then you do, and then you don't, and the humor of the work and all of that stuff. Which
you're a little wacky and absurd in some of your stuff.
Yeah, indeed.
I found myself. Look at you, like, thank you. It's like, wait a minute, let me go back again. What? So, I say this all the time, and I really mean it. I hope you'll come back again. I'd like to get to know you better. And I feel like listening to your work, again, people should go to stevenseidenberg.com to check out all of it. But I find you fascinating. I love people who, I'm going to say it, make me a better person. I know what you mean, but I like to grow. I want to grow. And so is that better? Grow.
Sure.
Grow. So I hope you'll come back. And either way, thank you so much for being here.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Everyone, thank you so much for hanging out with us in the private lounge at All About the Joy. Remember, you can get all of his works at stevenseidenberg.com. And you have 3 of your books that you read on all of the audio podcasts, right?
Yeah, that you can read, that you can find on Spotify or wherever else you get stuff.
I thought Coda was one of your most recent works, though.
Yeah, it's my most recent work.
Because that's what I was reading. That's what I was listening to and reading.
The work that came out most recently. So Coda, and then the one before that, Anon, and the one before that, Plain Sight. All 3 of those books
are free.
If you look me up on Spotify, though it may look like a 3-hour podcast or a 4-hour podcast, but it's really me reading the book.
Yeah, it's you reading the book, which is actually really cool. For me, it's really cool. So, but yeah, thank you, everyone. And remember, at the end of the day, it really is all about the joy. Thank you, everyone. Bye. Thanks for stopping by All About the Joy. Be better and stay beautiful, folks. Have a sweet day.